Bonjour, ma chère Chrystia, très content de te voir. Salut tout le monde. Merci de vous joindre à la ministre des Finances et vice-premier ministre ainsi qu'à moi pour vous parler de quelque chose de très important ce matin. En fait, on est ici parce que les conservateurs de Renault tiennent le Parlement en otage. Il ne reste que 8 jours avant que la Chambre s'ajourne et si on inclut les 2 journées d'opposition, en fait, il reste que 6 jours pour débattre et adopter les projets de loi du gouvernement. Et pour ceux d'entre nous à la Chambre qui croient à des politiques progressistes, ben, le moment est venu de se rassembler. C'est le moment de mettre de côté la petite politique, cette politique partisane qui vient aider aucun Canadien. Et comme je l'ai dit la semaine dernière, il y a un problème dans le Parlement minoritaire, dans ce Parlement-ci, et c'est qu'il y a un parti qui ne croit pas à la collaboration. Les conservateurs de Renault, ils ne croient pas au Parlement, ils croient à une seule chose, c'est l'obstruction. À maintes reprises, ils ont bloqué la volonté de la majorité de la Chambre. Ils utilisent leur minorité pour bloquer la volonté de la majorité. Et la semaine dernière, j'ai sonné l'alarme. Pourquoi? Parce que c'est là qu'on est rendu, à la Chambre des communes. Et pensez-y, c'est assez incroyable. Dans les minutes qui ont suivi ma conférence de presse jeudi dernier, dans les minutes, là, à peine, là, les conservateurs ont prouvé exactement ce que j'avançais. Ils ont présenté une motion pour fermer la Chambre pour la journée. Ils ont dit, OK, on ferme le Parlement, on arrête de travailler. Il est à peu près 10 heures du matin. Et les travailleurs de tout le Canada venaient à peine de commencer leur journée de travail et les conservateurs, eux, ils voulaient rentrer chez eux. Alors, évidemment, on a voté contre ça. C'est ridicule et absurde. Les autres partis ont aussi voté contre cette motion. Et les conservateurs ont perdu et les Canadiens ont gagné. Mais les conservateurs, ils n'ont pas abandonné. Ils ont continué à saboter les travaux de la Chambre avec des discours interminables pour bloquer l'ordre du jour du gouvernement. Pourquoi? Parce qu'on a présenté une motion pour que la Chambre siège plus longtemps, en soirée, pour débattre, passer, adopter des projets de loi importants. Puis, il faut qu'on puisse le faire. Alors, ou non, les Canadiens, on veut faire adopter 4 projets de loi dans le temps qui nous reste avant la fin de l'été. 4 projets de loi vraiment incontournables. Le projet de loi C-30, c'est la mise en œuvre du budget. Le projet de loi C-12 pour fixer des objectifs ambitieux mais nécessaires pour prévenir les changements climatiques. Projet de loi C-10 pour soutenir notre secteur culturel et le projet de loi C-6 pour interdire l'horrible pratique des thérapies de conversion. Et les conservateurs, ils s'opposent à ces projets de loi, mais ils sont minoritaires. Donc, ils utilisent la ruse pour empêcher la Chambre de faire avancer les priorités. Ils veulent absolument voter contre et bloquer notre programme progressiste à chaque étape. Et moi, je l'ai toujours dit, et vous l'avez vu, j'ai toujours dit que je travaillerai avec tous les membres de cette Chambre. Et c'est ce que j'ai toujours fait. Et en travaillant, on a fait beaucoup de choses. On a adopté des lois absolument nécessaires pour aider les Canadiens, les entreprises, les familles. Et donc, notre gouvernement, il est minoritaire. Ça veut dire qu'on a tous la responsabilité de travailler ensemble. Évidemment, le gouvernement a sa part de responsabilité, mais les autres partis aussi ont leur part de responsabilité. Et vous savez, les débats constructifs, c'est une bonne chose, c'est une très bonne chose. Mais la pure obstruction partisane à la Chambre, ça, c'est pas bon, ni pour notre démocratie, ni pour personne. En fait, c'est cynique et c'est toxique. Et c'est exactement ce qu'on a vu de la part du Parti conservateur. Et les Canadiens nous regardent. Ils nous regardent parce que c'est important pour eux. Et ils s'attendent à mieux de nous. Et c'est pour ça qu'on propose des mesures pour que le débat sur les 4 projets de loi prioritaires, y compris la loi d'exécution du budget, soit mené à terme rapidement. Et ces projets de loi-là, ils doivent faire l'objet d'un vote. On doit voter dessus, là, pour que les Canadiens puissent en bénéficier. Alors, je dis à mes collègues, et je leur tends la main, à mes collègues du Bloc, du NPD, du Parti vert, vous avez le choix. Vous pouvez rester là, à rien faire, pendant que les conservateurs font de l'obstruction à la Chambre. Vous pouvez regarder le train passer ou, et c'est votre choix, ou vous pouvez travailler avec nous pour qu'on s'assure que les députés aient la chance de voter sur des projets de loi progressistes qui vont aider des millions de Canadiens. Alors, je vous exhorte, je vous en prie de faire ce qu'il faut. So, we're here because Erin O'Toole's Conservatives are holding Parliament hostage. There are only 8 days left before the House rises. And if you include the opposition days that are left, there are 2. There are only, in reality, 6 days left to debate and pass government legislation. So for those in the House who believe in progressive policies, now is the time to come together. Now is the time to put aside partisanship. And as I said last week, the problem we have in this minority parliament is that one of the parties don't believe in collaboration. They don't want to have anything to do with collaboration. Erin O'Toole's Conservatives, they don't believe in Parliament. They only believe in one thing, political obstruction. And you've seen this, over and over again, they have obstructed the will of the majority of the House. They're using their minority to block the will of the majority. And last week, remember, on Thursday, I warned Canadian that this was what our politics had to come to in the House. This is what's happening in the House as we speak. And remarkably, within a minute of that, as I was finishing the press conference, the Conservative, they illustrated my point. They moved the motion to shut down the House for the day. It was probably around 10 a.m. They said, okay, it's 10 a.m. We've worked enough. Let's go home. While workers across Canada had barely begun their workday, Conservatives, they already wanted to go home. So we voted, of course, against that motion. So did the other parties. The Conservatives lost that vote, and Canadians won. But they didn't give up. The Conservatives, no. They hijacked the work of the House with endless speeches to block Parliament's agenda. Why? Because we've put forward a motion to have the House sit longer hours into the evening. We're asking for more hours to debate and pass important legislation. This is what we're pushing for, and Conservatives don't want it. On behalf of Canadians, we want to pass 4 bills. We're not asking for 10 or 20, no. Only 4 that are extremely important. C30, to implement the budget. C12, the legislation to achieve ambitious but necessary targets to stop climate change. C10, to support our cultural sector. And C6, to ban the cruel practice of conversion therapy. Conservatives, they oppose those bills, right? But they're just a minority in the House. So they use all the political games they can find to prevent the House from advancing these priorities. They're really determined to block our progressive agenda at every step. I've always said it. I want to work with everyone in this House, and we've done it in the past more than once. We've worked together, and we passed much needed bills in the pandemic to help Canadians, to help businesses, to help families. And this is a minority parliament. That means we share a responsibility to work together. Of course, the government has its own responsibility, but the other parties have that responsibility also. Constructive debate is good. It's good. It could be very fun too also, and it could be very productive. But pure partisan obstruction in the House is not good for democracy. It is cynical, and it is toxic. And unfortunately, that's what we've been seeing from the Conservatives. And you know what? Canadians are looking at us, and they take this very seriously, because it's really important. And Canadians expect better from us, from all of us. So this is why our government has given notice that on all 4 of our priority bills, including the Budget Implementation Act, and we will propose measures to ensure that the debate is completed. The bills must come to a vote. So what I say to my colleagues from the Bloc, the NDP, the Green Party, you can stand by and do nothing while the Conservative obstruct the House. You can turn a blind eye to all of it, or and this is your decision to make, or you can work with us to ensure members of Parliament are given the chance to vote on progressive legislation that would help millions of Canadians. And I'm urging you to do the right thing. Now, I'd like to turn to Minister Freeland, who would like to say a few words as well. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
OK. Merci beaucoup, Pablo. Et bon matin à tous. Et je suis complètement d'accord avec Pablo que c'est le moment pour sonner l'alarme. Le projet de loi C30, la loi d'exécution du budget, apportera aux Canadiens un soutien dont ils ont grandement besoin. I'm here today because I am deeply concerned that the critical support measures for Canadians contained within the budget bill are falling victim to opposition delay tactics, which the government House Leader has just outlined. Allow me to remind you of some of the concrete measures at stake in this budget legislation. Bill C-30 includes key measures that would First, extend the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy, and lockdown support until September 25th, 2021. These measures expire this month unless Parliament approves the extension. Second, the extension of important income support for Canadians, such as the Canada Recovery Benefit and the Canada Recovery Caregiving Benefit. Third, establish the new Canada Recovery Hiring Program, which will help businesses with the costs of hiring new workers as our economy reopens. 4. Bonifier les prestations de la sécurité de l'AVS pour les personnes âgées de 75 ans ou plus, afin de leur offrir une meilleure sécurité financière à un moment de la vie où ils risquent d'épuiser leurs économies. 5. Bonifier l'allocation canadienne pour les travailleurs afin d'offrir plus d'argent aux Canadiens à faible revenu, ce qui permettra d'aider environ 1 million de Canadiens de plus et de sortir près de 100 000 personnes de la pauvreté. 6. Prolonger les prestations de maladie de l'assurance-emploi pour les faire passer de 15 à 26 semaines. 7. Établir un salaire minimum fédéral de 15 $. 8. Prolonger la dispense d'intérêt sur les prêts fédéraux aux étudiants et aux apprentis jusqu'en mars 2023. 9. Fournir un supplément d'argent de 5 milliards de dollars aux provinces et aux territoires, plus précisément 4 milliards de dollars au titre de transfert canadien en matière de santé pour aider les provinces et les territoires à faire face aux pressions immédiates exercées sur le système de soins de santé et 1 milliard de dollars pour soutenir les campagnes de vaccination qui sont si importantes aujourd'hui. 10. Fournir 2,2 milliards de dollars pour répondre aux priorités à court terme en matière d'infrastructures des municipalités. A été Can you hear me? Am I back now?
We lost you for a little bit.
Okay, did you lose me at point 10, Pablo? Okay. And let me just say sorry to the press corps. I am here in quarantine in my attic, and so tech support is myself. Okay, Pablo, I'm counting on you to smile if you can hear me. Okay, alors 10. Fournir 2,2 milliards de dollars pour répondre aux priorités à court terme en matière d'infrastructures des municipalités et des communautés des Premières Nations. Les fonds seront versés par l'intermédiaire du Fonds de la taxe sur l'essence fédérale, qui a été renommé le Fonds pour le développement des collectivités du Canada. Simply put, Bill C-30 is a pragmatic, ambitious, responsible plan to help all Canadians and to give Canadians and Canadian businesses the support they need to come roaring back from the COVID pandemic. Unfortunately, the Conservative Party is exploiting parliamentary tactics to deny Canadians this essential support. Members of Parliament from all parties in this House have debated this legislation for a combined 22 hours, hearing from more than 160 speakers. The House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance has studied the bill exhaustively for more than 40 hours, hearing from 132 witnesses. I have appeared before the committee to address members' questions. In the case of Bill C-14, the Economic Statement Implementation Act, which implemented the Fall Economic Statement, the Conservative Party delayed urgent support programs for months. There were real-world consequences. Payments to Canadian families of the Canada Child Benefit top-up were delayed for nearly 6 months. That caused a lot of hardship for millions of Canadians. Today, the government will move a motion for time allocation on Bill C-30. We have been left with no choice. Conservative Party delay tactics mean that core support programs for Canadian workers and small businesses will expire this month, just as we are all working so hard to reopen the economy. That is completely unacceptable. Canadians have sacrificed too much to be confronted with this additional, needless obstacle. Without parliamentary approval of the Budget Implementation Act, the wage subsidy, which has supported 5.3 million jobs, will expire this month. Without parliamentary approval of the Budget Implementation Act, the rent subsidy, which has supported 190,000 businesses, will expire this month. Without parliamentary approval of the Budget Implementation Act, the Canada Recovery Benefit, which has supported 2 million Canadians during the pandemic, will no longer be there for people who need it most. That is why we are calling on the other parties in the House of Commons to use the parliamentary tools at our disposal, including time allocation, to get these supports to Canadians. This bill has been debated in the House. It has been studied at committee. It is now time to call the question. It is time to put aside the theatrics and to lay out, once and for all, where we all stand on these issues. Our government has said since the beginning of this pandemic that we would do whatever it takes to support Canadians, and we will keep that promise. We will not stand idly by as opposition parties seek to create additional hardship for Canadians who have already sacrificed so much. We're now happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister et Monsieur le Ministre. We will now turn to the phone for questions. It'll be one question, one follow-up, une question et une question en suivi. Opérateur?
Merci, thank you. Please press star 1 at this time to ask a question. S'il vous plaît, appuyez sur l'étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. La première question, the first question is from Jordan Press of the Canadian Press. Your line is open. Please go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for your time. My first question is just going to ask if you'd be willing to sit through the summer at all, similar to what you did last year, from that passing some of this important legislation you say needs to be passed immediately.
If we're always ready to work, but even if we sit all summer, if the Conservatives keep blocking and obstruction, it's not going to change anything. They have to stop.
And I'd just like to add, Pablo, if I may, is that okay? I am speaking today as finance minister, and I am here because I absolutely support the message that Pablo delivered last week, that now is the time to sound the alarm. As I outlined in my remarks, Canadians need the support measures in the budget right now. I'd like to remind people of the gravity of the situation. We have just gone through a global pandemic. Our economy has suffered the deepest recession since the Great Depression. Thanks to Canadians being so amazing and really stepping up to get vaccinated and demonstrating remarkable discipline and resilience during the pandemic and during the lockdowns, our country is now poised to come roaring back. Across the country, the economy is reopening. But our government absolutely believes that the business and income support measures currently in place need to be extended to the end of September. These measures run out this month. And I strongly believe Canadians need that support. So it really is time to end the partisan games. It is time to end the theatrics. It is time for all MPs to get to work. And speaking as finance minister, let me just say, to pass the budget.
And as my follow-up, Deputy Prime Minister, as the finance minister, do you foresee, given what you have seen with some of the economic indicators, do you foresee a need to be consulting with the opposition parties over the summer, depending on how things go, that you may need to reshape some of that aid, as you talk about, is so needed right now?
We consult with the opposition parties often. I've spoken with all of them as the budget legislation has advanced. In fact, I had a conversation over the weekend, as I know Pablo did. Our measures include some levers which would allow the government the possibility of adjusting the supports if needed. I do want to say, though, that I believe the plan we have in place, which we proposed on April 19th when we delivered the budget, for continuing the measures through to the end of September, and then putting in a new transition measure, the hiring credit. When I look at both the situation with vaccines and with the level of contagion, as well as the economic indicators, right now, today, I'm really comfortable with the measures we have in place and the plan we have in place.
Merci. Prochaine question.
Merci. Thank you. The next question, la question suivante est de Raymond Filion de TVA. La parole est à vous.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour à tous. Question pour M. Rodriguez. Dans la mesure où les sondages démontrent actuellement que si des élections avaient lieu maintenant, on se retrouverait avec pas mal la même distribution des sièges aux communes que présentement, à savoir que vous seriez encore minoritaire, les conservateurs seraient là aussi. Est-ce que ça vaut la peine de dépenser plus d'1 demi-milliard de dollars pour tenir des élections cet été?
Bonjour Raymond, plaisir de vous entendre comme toujours. On n'en veut pas d'élections, on l'a dit. On ne veut pas des élections, on veut des projets de loi. Le seul parti qui a voté systématiquement contre la confiance du gouvernement, donc qui aurait pu faire tomber le gouvernement n'importe quand, c'est les conservateurs. Mais le Bloc aussi, rappelez-vous ce printemps-ci, quand M. Blanchet disait qu'il fallait qu'il y ait des élections ce printemps. Alors, moi, je vais laisser les autres partis parler d'élections, mais on va se concentrer sur les projets de loi fondamentaux. Mme Freeland l'a vu, la vice-première ministre a expliqué pourquoi ce projet de loi doit passer maintenant. Les mesures qui sont si importantes pour l'ensemble des Québécois et l'ensemble des Canadiens, Raymond, elles viennent d'échéance maintenant. Alors, les partis progressistes qui croient, comme nous, que le gouvernement doit être présent pour donner un coup de pouce à la population, pour marcher côte à côte avec la population, on fait appel à ces partis progressistes-là pour dire mettons fin au blocage des conservateurs et adoptons ces projets de loi-là qui vont nous permettre de faire en sorte que les mesures durent plus longtemps. On ne veut pas d'élections, on veut des bons projets de loi pour les Canadiens.
Mais c'est quand même votre deuxième sortie en moins d'une semaine sur le même sujet. Vous avez dit tout à l'heure très clairement, il y a un problème dans ce Parlement, c'est les conservateurs. Alors, pour tout le monde, les gens qui regardent ça à la maison, là, vous êtes en train de mettre la table pour un déclenchement électoral. Comment on ne peut pas penser le contraire?
Encore une fois, Raymond, ce que l'on souhaite, c'est d'avoir ces projets de loi-là. Si l'appel aux partis se multiplie, c'est normal. Je l'ai dit tantôt, il reste 8 jours au total, dont 2 qui vont à l'opposition. Il en reste 6. Il reste 6 projets de loi, 6 journées, pardon, pour passer les projets de loi fondamentaux, dont le budget, qui a tous ces programmes-là de subvention salariale, d'aide aux loyers, d'aide à nos aînés, salaire minimum fédéral, l'aide pour la vaccination. Tout ça, c'est dans le budget, dans le projet de loi qui met en œuvre le budget. Alors, on a besoin de cela. On a besoin du projet de loi C10 pour aider le secteur culturel qui perd de l'argent à chaque jour. On a besoin de C12 parce que c'est notre plus grande responsabilité qui est celle de travailler sur la planète pour laisser un meilleur futur à nos enfants. Et C6, il faut qu'on mette fin à cette horreur-là que sont les thérapies de conversion. Mais je reviens sur C30, Raymond. Si on n'a pas C30, là, ces mesures-là, c'est fini.
Et si je peux me permettre d'ajouter, en appui et en soutien du Pablo, Raymond, bonjour, bon matin. Je suis ici pour souligner pour tous les Canadiens qu'aujourd'hui, c'est le 14 juin. Et ce qu'on veut, c'est le budget, c'est l'appui pour le budget au Parlement. Et cet appui est nécessaire pour avoir les programmes de soutien des Canadiens et Canadiennes, des entreprises canadiennes. La relance économique a déjà commencé grâce à la résilience, grâce au travail des Canadiens, au travail extraordinaire, au sacrifice extraordinaire que les Canadiens et Canadiennes ont fait. Mais vraiment, on a besoin, l'économie a besoin, les Canadiens et Canadiennes ont besoin de l'appui additionnel que le budget donnera. Mais nous sommes une minorité au Parlement. Nous ne pouvons pas donner cet appui aux Canadiens et Canadiennes sans l'appui des autres députés du Parlement. Et nous sommes ici pour dire vraiment que le temps pour les chicanes partisanes, c'est passé. Maintenant, c'est le temps pour travailler ensemble pour finir avec la pandémie, pour finir avec la récession économique et pour avoir une réouverture forte pendant l'été. Mais sans le travail ensemble des députés du Parlement, ce ne sera pas possible.
Thank you. Next question.
Merci, thank you. The next question, la question suivante is from Annie Bergeron-Oliver of CTV National News. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much for taking my questions. I'm wondering if you can tell me what specifically is the holdup around the budget implementation bill, and is the fact that this is a confidence motion also a reason the government hasn't passed the bill yet or tried to?
Well, the government has already the confidence of the House on the budget, but the Conservatives are stalling the time that we have in the House. So what we want to call a bill, if you look at what's happening these days, they find one way or another to make us waste our time. On Thursday, they decided that they wanted to shut down the House. So they're starting all the process on that, and we had to vote on that. That takes a lot of time. Then they refused, and they filibustered, they refused to extend the hours that we need to debate those important bills. And third, they're starting filibustering last week again and speaking for hours. We need those hours to finish the debate and vote on the bills. Parliament ends next Wednesday, the 23rd. We have 6 days to debate those bills, including those 4 important bills, and including the budget that contains everything that the Minister of Finance has said. So I'm calling the Conservatives to stop doing that, and friends from the other progressive parties help us pass this very important legislation.
And as a follow-up, I'm wondering if you can explain why it's so important to pass these 4 bills right now, given that, you know, the House, when it comes back in September, if there's no election, as you say, you don't want one, you could pick up and resume then. So why is it important to pass these 4 bills right now before the summer? And is it not possible just to prioritize the budget implementation bill, which, as you mentioned, has a number of programs that are set to expire within the next few weeks?
Well, the budget speaks for itself, and maybe Chrystia can add on that, but we need, if no budget bill, no extension of the programs, Canadians lose. The other bills, take the cultural sector. They're losing millions every month. What we're asking is for the web giants to contribute to our artists that were hit harder than anyone else by the pandemic. So C10 is absolutely essential. C12, we're talking about the environment. We're talking about the planet. You can see already the impact it has. We've seen it for years, the impact that climate change is having on our planet. So are we going to wait and waste more time? No, we have to adapt that now. We owe it to our children. And conversion therapy. Seriously, we really want to keep on having those programs that are hurted and keep hurting so many people from the LGBTQ community, especially young people. So theoretically, we could say, you know what? It's true. We're coming back in September, so let's forget everything and we'll debate it on summer and we're going to go home this summer and have a nice summer and relax. Or we can say, let's do the important things now. And this is what we're asking.
Merci. Prochaine question.
Thank you, merci. La prochaine question, the next question is from Amanda Connolly of Global News. Please go ahead, your line is open.
Good morning. My question is for the Deputy Prime Minister. Minister Freeland, you've offered an apology before to women who have been or experienced harassment in the Canadian military. So I'd like to ask you now, do you believe it was appropriate for the head of the Navy and the Vice Chief of the Defence Staff to go golfing with General Jonathan Vance while he remains under military police investigation? And do you believe, given what we've seen here, that senior leaders in the Canadian military really do believe that they are untouchable?
Thank you for the question, Amanda. I learned about this over the weekend, as did the rest of our government. I was very disappointed, very surprised. I think this showed very poor judgment. And I absolutely understand and sympathize with the sentiment that men and women, but maybe especially women, serving in the Canadian Armed Forces having seen this, and the concerns that it causes them to have about the possibility of real fairness for them. Let me be clear with Canadians, and maybe particularly Canadian women. There needs to be a real change in culture in the Canadian Armed Forces. It is totally unacceptable for anyone, for any Canadian woman, let me say specifically Canadian men too, but Canadian women who serve our country in uniform must not be subject to sexual harassment, to any kind of sexual abuse at work. And they need to know that if harassment or abuse happens, there is a clear, fair, objective way that their complaints, a clear, objective, impartial way that their complaints will be addressed. Our government is acting on this. There is money in the budget, which we're talking about today, which we want to have passed to fund further work on the creation of a system to protect and support the Canadian women of the armed forces against sexual harassment.
And to follow up on that, are you concerned that the military's insistence that it can credibly investigate sexual misconduct is now tarnished, given that the head of the Navy issued an apology that also simultaneously described his decision to go golfing with Vance as, quote, a public display of support? Because I can tell you, we've heard repeatedly over the last 24 hours from women and men in the military who were left gutted by this and say, this is the old boys club in action. Do you share that view?
I've said, Amanda, that I was surprised and disappointed by this. It shows very poor judgment and sends entirely the wrong message to the whole country. First and foremost, people who serve in the Canadian Armed Forces. And I just want to say directly to the people who serve in the Canadian Armed Forces, our government knows there needs to be a big change in culture. And we know that people who are being harassed need to be able to speak out, and they need to have a system where they know their complaints will be taken seriously, will be treated impartially and fairly.
Thank you. Next question.
Merci, thank you. La question suivante. The next question is from Tom Perry of CBC News. Please go ahead.
Hello, thanks for taking our questions. Deputy Prime Minister, I'd like to ask you just on a different topic. Aaron O'Toole was asked this morning about his party's past policies opposing M103, the barbaric cultural practices line, things like that. He said that all parties need to do better responding to Islamophobia. I'd like to get your response to that. Do you think that some parties have more to reflect upon when it comes to fighting Islamophobia, or do you think that all parties need to do better?
Thank you for the question, Tom. And I'm not sure, there was a little bit of static on my line at the beginning, but I think I got the gist of it. Look, the absolutely horrific act of terrorism in London, Ontario, needs to be taken extremely seriously by all Canadians, and particularly those of us who are not racialized, those of us who are not Muslim, need to really understand that Islamophobia exists in our country, that white supremacism exists in our country, that terrorist attacks happen in our country, which is so wonderful, but still flawed. Terrorist attacks targeting Muslim Canadians happen in Canada, and we all need to take that very, very seriously, and we need to work very, very hard to end Islamophobia and to stand up against white supremacism. Of course, that is a job for government. Of course, that is a job for all political leaders across the country. But I think it's more than that. I mean, I think this is a job for every single Canadian, and something that we all really, really need to work on together. I'm glad that our government has taken some meaningful steps in this direction. You know, with hindsight, I'm glad that as Foreign Minister, I spoke at the UN Security Council and used the words Islamophobia and white supremacism and said these were terrorist threats. I'm sorry, so sorry that the attacks showed that to be right. But I want to say, speaking for our government, we absolutely appreciate the job is not done. There is a lot more we need to do. We are listening really hard to our Muslim colleagues, to our Muslim constituents. And I want to say to them, we absolutely are with you. And as a country, we need to do much, much better. As a government, we are committed to working with you to make that change happen.
And Minister Rodriguez, can I just ask you, you were using words like cynical, toxic to describe the tone in Parliament right now. You said the Conservatives don't believe in Parliament. All they believe in is obstruction. I'm just wondering, and I know, I think I might know what your answer is, but are you saying here it's time for an election? Is that what you're saying in making comments like that?
No, we don't want an election. We want legislation. But we have to send this strong message to all parliamentarians, on one side to the Conservatives, and telling them, it's time you guys stop now. Because we have all shared this responsibility in a minority government. Of course, the government has its responsibility, but others have it too because of the minority context. So if we want bills to pass for the benefit of all Canadians, for our workers, for our families, for small businesses, we have to collaborate and definitely not jam Parliament. And the Conservatives are jamming that Parliament, actually. As I said it on Thursday, you saw it. They want to shut down Parliament. It was about 10:30 in the morning. They did introduce a motion that we had to vote on to shut down Parliament. How serious is that? And then they filibuster and they refuse to extend hours. Come on. They refuse to extend hours. Like we can't work later. They don't want to work at night. They're tired. I don't know what it is. But we should extend those hours. We need those hours to pass those important bills. So that's my message to the Conservatives and to the other progressive parties. I'm saying, guys, let's work together on these progressive bills to help Canadians from coast to coast to coast. So we're not talking about election on our side, that's for sure. And again, as I said, we don't want an election, we want legislation.
And if I could just add, Pablo, ça va? Je peux ajouter? So just to add, speaking as finance minister, I am here with Pablo today to really underscore for Canadians the seriousness of the situation, the gravity of the situation. It's the 14th of June. We have not yet passed the budget. And this is no ordinary budget. This is the budget that Canadians need to finish the fight against COVID and to come roaring back from the COVID recession. The wage subsidy, the rent subsidy, the lockdown support, these all expire this month. The budget extends them to the 25th of September. Canadians need that extra support to come roaring back. The CRB, the income support measures, which have been so essential throughout COVID, Canadians need those extended as well as this budget does to finish the work of fighting COVID and to come roaring back. So this is, I really just want to remind people, we are just at the end of a global pandemic. Our government has a plan to get Canadians through, to punch our way out of the COVID recession. Canadians deserve this support. People have been so great. They have been so resilient. They have sacrificed so much. And they need the measures in the budget to finally finish this fight. We have debated these measures exhaustively. All that we are saying is let these measures come to a vote. This is really serious. We need to do this now. We have to stop the delay.
Thank you. On va prendre une dernière question. We will take one last question. Thank you.
Merci. Thank you. Notre dernière question, the last question, is from Cormac McSweeney of CT News. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I know you say you don't want an election, but you're focusing heavily on the roadblocks that you're facing within Parliament. So is it your opinion then that Parliament is still functional at this time? And although you don't want an election, is an election reluctantly on the table if you can't get key pieces of legislation like the budget bill passed in a timely manner?
Well, I will remind you that in a minority parliament, an election can happen in time. There can be a mistake. Remember Joe Clark when he counted his whip made a mistake when he counted the MPs that were present at that moment. The opposition may decide that they want to go and vote against us. But on our side, we've been very clear, and that's why we're pushing so hard for those bills. I mean, we've been working extremely seriously, professionally, with all our hearts to help Canadians. We were able to negotiate with all parties to make sure that All those important programs were in place. We were an example to the world in the way we were able to deliver those programs to Canadians. Now, for some reason, the Conservatives they turned around and they said, no, you know what? I don't believe in collaboration anymore. I just want to block everything. So they've been doing that. They keep doing that. And it has to stop. And as for the other parties, I mean, do they believe in what's in the budget? I'm sure they do. So support us. Should we stop conversion therapy? I'm sure the other parties agree. Should we do more for the environment? I'm sure the other parties agree. Should we do more for our culture? I'm also sure that the other parties agree. But that has to translate in concrete action and votes. So this is what we're asking from the other party, especially for the budget, because it contains so many good measures that the Deputy Prime Minister explained.
Okay, and I'm still hoping for some clarity. Do you think Parliament is still functional at this time? But on a separate question for the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, domestic terror charges have now officially been laid against the suspect in the horrific London attack. And I'm just wondering if I could get your reaction to the fact that these domestic terror charges have now been laid, but also when it comes to this national summit on Islamophobia that all parties have agreed to, and to call on the government to try and organize such an event in collaboration with Muslim communities. Is the federal government willing to bring new money to the table in order to try and combat Islamophobia in Canada?
So thank you for the question. And, again, on the terrorist attack in London, I think it is really important for us to name it as an act of terror. It is important for us to identify this as an act of Islamophobia, and it is important for us to identify the terrible threat that white supremacism poses to Canada and to Canadians. It's important for the courts and the judicial process to do its work. And I think that, the fact that the anti-Islamophobia summit is now going to happen is a really important step. The federal government has already invested in the fight against Islamophobia and against white supremacism. As I said earlier today, clearly there is a lot more work to do, and we're going to continue to do that work. And we must. It's a real priority, and I believe it's a priority for the whole country. This definitely goes beyond politics. And Cormac, to your question about Parliament and about an election, let me just reinforce what Pablo has already said. Our government does not want an election. What we want to do is to continue the essential work of finishing the fight against COVID and supporting Canadians as we punch our way out of the COVID recession. But Cormac, we can't do it alone. The reality is we are a minority in Parliament, and we're a parliamentary democracy. So we need Parliament to pass laws to do this important work of supporting Canadians, of finishing the fight against COVID, and of coming roaring back from the COVID recession. And Pablo and I are here today to call on the other parties in the House to, end the theatrics, to look at the calendar, to see it's the 14th of June, and to understand that we all have a duty and a responsibility to Canadians and to our constituents to roll up our sleeves, to get to work, and as the finance minister, let me just say, to pass the budget. Now, I am constitutionally an optimist. I believe in the better angels of our nature, and I believe that fundamentally Canada works. And so I believe that people are going to shake their heads this week, roll up their sleeves, get to work, and pass the budget and pass these other pieces of progressive, really important legislation. But I think that it's important for Canadians to understand the seriousness, the gravity of this moment, and for Canadians to be sure that their elected representatives understand the seriousness of this moment. I really believe that Canadians don't want an election right now. I believe that Canadians know how essential these government support programs are. I believe Canadians really, really want to finish the fight against COVID and to have a strong recovery from the COVID recession. Canadians want to have a great summer of reopening. And Pablo and I are here to just explain to Canadians that to have that great summer of reopening, we believe that Canadians and Canadian businesses need the additional support that the budget will provide. They need that support to be extended through to the end of September. And so we're just saying today, we think that support is necessary. We have laid out a clear, very, very specific plan, which has been debated for hours and hours and hours in the House and at committee. Now is the time to end delaying tactics. Now is the time to vote on that economic plan on the budget and to be sure that Canadians continue to have the support that they need.
Thank you. And that concludes today's press conference. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui. Merci.
Merci. Bye tout le monde.